The trouble started the day I rolled up in my freshly waxed, navy blue pickup, a '92 Chevy, not flashy, not lifted, just clean, reliable, and mine. I'd just moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks earlier. Quiet cul-de-sac, decent neighbors, overpriced HOA with a reputation for being a pain. I figured if I kept my yard trimmed and didn't blast music past 10, I'd be fine. That was before Edith Baxter showed up. Edith was the HOA president, early 50s, tight blonde bob, the kind of woman who wore pastel cardigans like armor. She cornered me while I was unloading a few toolboxes from the back of my truck. "Mr. Sutton," she said, arms crossed like she was holding the world together with that pose. "This vehicle violates our neighborhood aesthetic standards." I blinked. "What does that even mean?" She tapped a laminated paper in her folder like she was holding the Constitution. "We discourage commercial-looking vehicles in driveways. It lowers property values. You'll need to keep your truck in the garage or park it off-site." I laughed, thought she was joking. "It's a personal vehicle. I'm a carpenter, not a construction crew. It fits in my driveway and it's registered and insured. There's nothing illegal about it." "That may be," she sniffed, "but we have rules for a reason. I'll be issuing a formal notice." I watched her walk away like she'd just won a war. The next morning, there was a bright orange violation sticker slapped on my windshield. My truck hadn't moved an inch. I peeled it off and tossed it in the trash. Then came the fines, $50, then $100. I appealed, denied. I requested a board meeting. Edith rescheduled it, twice. When I finally got my 5 minutes to speak, she cut me off halfway through and said, "We're not here to debate taste." That's when I decided if she didn't like my truck so much, I'd give her a closer look. The HOA office was located at the front of the neighborhood, next to the clubhouse. There were 3 reserved parking spots out front. One of them had a shiny gold plaque, reserved for HOA president. The next morning, I pulled in early, backed my pickup neatly into Edith's spot and walked the half-mile back home. Left it there all day. The next afternoon, there was a note under my wiper. "This is private parking. You are not authorized to park here. You will be towed." I parked there the next day, and the next. On the 4th day, Edith was waiting for me when I dropped by to switch out a tape measure I'd left in the glove box. "You can't keep doing this," she snapped, her voice higher than usual. "That spot is reserved. So's my driveway," I said, "and I pay for it, unlike this one. This is harassment." "No, Edith, harassment is slapping fake violations on someone's personal vehicle just because you don't like how it looks." She went red in the face and stormed back into the office. I waved at the security camera on the corner of the building. I wasn't moving that truck. Not until someone started playing fair. By the end of the first week, Edith wasn't hiding her frustration anymore. I'd started keeping a little folding chair in the bed of my truck, just so I could sit and sip coffee for 20 minutes every morning before walking back home. Her office had windows facing the lot, and I knew she could see me. She started showing up earlier, parking in the visitor spots instead. Her car, a silver BMW coupe, always looked like it had just left a showroom. I'd heard from a neighbor that she cleaned it herself every other day. The HOA rules she clung to were starting to unravel under their own weight. Residents I barely knew began waving as they passed. One guy from 3 doors down, Dave, leaned out his car window and said, "About time someone stood up to her." I kept my replies short and polite. No point in making enemies of anyone who might be useful later. I'd already started documenting everything: photos, timestamps, even backing up HOA emails I'd received. I wasn't planning on losing this fight. I just hadn't decided how far I'd take it yet. That decision came the following Tuesday. I came home from work just after 6. The air still held the heat from the day and my shirt clung to my back. I turned onto my street and stopped cold. My truck was gone. At first, I thought maybe it had been towed, but there was no sign, no notice on my door, no voicemail. I checked with the towing companies in town. Nothing. It wasn't until I pulled up the feed from the camera I'd mounted above my garage that I saw what happened. At 2:47 in the afternoon, a white service pickup with no markings pulled into the HOA lot. A man in khakis and sunglasses got out, opened the driver's side door of my truck using a slim Jim, slid behind the wheel, and drove off like it belonged to him. I watched the whole thing, my fists clenched tight. No flashing lights, no uniform, no paperwork. Just a guy stealing my truck in broad daylight. And Edith standing off to the side, arms folded, watching it happen. I printed the footage and drove straight to the police station. The officer at the front desk, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes and a nameplate that read Rodriguez, watched the video silently. "You said you didn't authorize a tow," he asked. "No, and there's no record of one." "I called every company in a 30-mile radius." He nodded, then leaned back in his chair. "Looks like vehicle theft, and if she arranged it, that's conspiracy, possibly impersonating an officer depending on how they pulled it off." I filed a report. They took copies of the footage, my registration, and the emails I'd received from the HOA threatening towing if the issue persisted. Officer Rodriguez promised to escalate it to the Property Crimes Division. The next morning, I walked to the HOA office. My truck was still gone, and Edith wasn't in her usual parking spot. I knocked on the glass door. It opened after a few seconds, revealing a guy I hadn't seen before. Tall, maybe in his early 30s, with a clipboard in hand and a pinched expression. "You with the HOA?" I asked. "No," he said. "County code enforcement. We received several complaints about zoning violations and improper use of private property under a non-commercial charter." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. I didn't know the HOA could trigger county inspections." "They didn't." "Your neighbor 2 doors down did." He nodded toward Dave's house. "Turns out this office space isn't zoned for the kind of administrative activity they've been conducting, and that sign out front, 'Not permitted,'" he flipped through his clipboard. "Also, that reserved parking spot. It's painted on common property. No ordinance allows a homeowners association president to claim a permanent space for personal use." "Mind if I stick around while you write it up?" I asked. He shrugged. "Public sidewalk. Knock yourself out." While he took pictures and scribbled notes, Edith finally showed up. She spotted me first, then the inspector. Her pace slowed, but she didn't stop walking until she was right in front of him. "I don't believe you have jurisdiction here," she said. He held up his badge. "Code enforcement has jurisdiction anywhere zoning laws are applicable. You're operating in a residential zone, Mrs. Baxter, not an administrative one. I'll be contacting our attorney." "You'll want to do that," he said. "You've got 7 days to cease operations here or face fines starting at $500 per day." She turned to me, her face tight with fury. "This is your doing. You stole my truck." Her eyes flickered just for a second, then she recovered. "It was removed for violating HOA policy." "By who? You never filed a tow order, no company's claiming the job. That makes it theft, and the police agree." She didn't respond, just turned and walked inside, slamming the door behind her. 2 days later, I got a call from the precinct. They found my truck parked behind a private storage facility 15 minutes outside of town. No plates, battery disconnected. A tow company employee admitted to being paid in cash by a woman in a blue blouse to remove a nuisance vehicle and keep it off the books. The facility's security cameras confirmed it. Edith was on tape, handing over a thick envelope. They arrested her that Friday. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit vehicle theft, misuse of HOA authority, and obstruction. Her bail was set high, and she didn't make it out that weekend. Word spread fast. By Sunday morning, neighbors were knocking on my door. Some apologized for not stepping in earlier. Others brought over copies of their own ridiculous HOA fines and letters. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Edith had targeted. She'd find a retired couple 2 blocks over for using beige curtains instead of white. Another guy got cited for having too many tomato plants in his backyard. I started collecting everything. One by one, neighbors emailed me copies of notices, violation slips, and HOA newsletters going back years. A pattern emerged. Edith had been selectively enforcing rules, fining people she didn't like, and ignoring complaints from those she favored. By the following week, we had a full binder. I called a meeting, not through the HOA, but at the community park. 42 residents showed up. I laid out the evidence, then introduced a lawyer friend of mine, Carmen, a former city attorney who dealt with HOA abuse cases before. She explained how we could call an emergency election, dissolve the current board under state law, and file a class action to recover improperly collected fines. People were fired up. A petition started circulating that night. As for my truck, I parked it in front of the clubhouse every day for a week after Edith's arrest. No one said a word. The gold plaque on her reserved spot was quietly removed, the paint scrubbed off by a maintenance worker in silence. Edith's court date was scheduled for early next month, and we planned to be there, every last one of us. Not with pitchforks, but with paperwork, testimonies, photos, and a binder full of receipts. 2 weeks after Edith's arrest, the community newsletter skipped its usual delivery. No updates, no passive-aggressive reminders about grass height or mailbox color. The silence was deafening in a neighborhood that had grown used to weekly doses of micromanagement. People noticed. They also noticed the broken lock on the HOA's office door, the one someone had clearly forced their way through after the police sealed it during their investigation. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, arms folded, watching a locksmith work under the supervision of a uniformed officer. The locksmith shook his head and muttered something I couldn't hear. Officer Danner, the one handling the HOA case, spotted me and waved me over. "You ever come in here before?" he asked, gesturing toward the office. "Only once." Edith made sure no one got past the front counter. He stepped aside, motioning toward the open doorway. "You should take a look." The office was smaller than I remembered. The blinds were drawn, giving the fluorescent lights a sickly green hue. Filing cabinets lined the back wall, one drawer left open with papers spilling out. The place had been ransacked, but not in a hurry. Whoever did it had time. Carefully removed documents, pulled hard drives, left little behind. Danner pointed to the desk. We found a burner phone in the drawer. Texts between your HOA president and someone listed as M. They talk about cash payments, towing arrangements, and something called Phase 2. You know anything about that? Absolutely not, I said. But if there's a Phase 1, I don't think it was just about my truck. He nodded slowly. That's what we're thinking too. That afternoon, Carmen invited me to her office downtown. She'd been combing through the HOA's public financial filings, and what she found was worse than anyone expected. For the past 4 years, the HOA had been collecting maintenance fees for a set of upgrades that never happened: new pool filters, updated security cameras, even a clubhouse renovation that existed only on paper. They funneled nearly $94,000 into a capital improvement reserve, she said, flipping through the spreadsheets. But the reserve account doesn't exist. It's just a line item. Every year the number goes up, but there's no corresponding account in any of the bank records. I leaned forward. So where's the money? That's the kicker. We followed the paper trail, 2 shell companies, Sunrise Developments and L&F Property Services. Both registered to a mailbox in a strip mall 3 towns over. And guess whose name is on the original filings? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her sister, Carmen said. And her niece. Edith funneled thousands in fake vendor payments to companies owned by her own family. And she used HOA funds to do it. We brought the evidence to the county prosecutor the next morning. It didn't take long for them to act. Subpoenas were issued. A forensic accountant was assigned to the case. The investigation ballooned overnight. By Thursday, Edith wasn't the only one under scrutiny. 2 former board members resigned in the span of a day. One of them, Harold Crane, had been the treasurer for the past 6 years. He'd signed off on every payment. Officer Danner called me again. "You might want to come down here," he said. "We're questioning Crane now. You need to hear what he just admitted." The interview room had a one-way mirror, but they let me sit in the hallway with a speaker. Crane sat hunched over, his hands clasped tight. His voice was shaky but clear. "She said it was for the good of the neighborhood," he said. "She told me the board needed emergency funds for legal protection in case we were sued. I didn't ask questions, I just signed the checks." "Did you know the companies were fake?" the detective asked. "No, not at first." But then the invoices started looking. Copied. The same template, same typos. I confronted her once. She told me to back off or she'd report me for misappropriating funds. Said she'd already filed a complaint with the licensing board about my accounting credentials. I didn't even know there was a complaint until months later. He paused, then added, "I was scared. She didn't threaten people directly. She found ways to ruin them, quietly." I left the station with a knot in my stomach. This wasn't about parking spots or curtain colors anymore. Edith had built a power structure, and no one had stopped her for years because she didn't need to raise her voice to destroy someone. She just needed paperwork. The emergency election was held the following week. Carmen facilitated it with 2 neutral election monitors from the city's mediation board. We held it at the local high school gymnasium to accommodate the crowd. Over 100 residents showed up. It wasn't just about replacing the board anymore. It was about cleansing the entire system. I ran for a seat reluctantly. I didn't want the job, but Carmen insisted we needed someone with a spine and a long memory on that board. I won by a landslide. Dave was elected vice president. A retired teacher named Linda took the treasurer role. We passed a bylaw that night requiring all board meetings to be publicly recorded and posted online within 24 hours. We also voted unanimously to suspend all ongoing fines and initiate a full refund process for any violations issued without due process. Carmen drafted the resolution. I read it aloud. The applause lasted 2 minutes. The next morning, I returned to the HOA office, this time with keys. It was surreal unlocking the front door. The place still smelled faintly like air freshener and toner. I walked to the back cabinet, the one Edith never let anyone near, and opened the bottom drawer. More invoices, more files. A ledger labeled Special Projects. I photographed everything and sent it straight to the prosecutor's office. 3 days later, the county froze the HOA's old operating account. Edith was denied bail after the prosecutor revealed she had attempted to wire funds to an offshore account in Belize. Her sister and niece were both indicted on charges of wire fraud and money laundering. Crane took a plea deal and agreed to testify. The trial was set for early spring. In the meantime, we got to work. We replaced the broken pool filters ourselves. Dave donated the lumber. A couple of teenagers helped carry supplies. Linda organized a community cleanup day. Someone brought a grill. Someone else brought lemonade. For the first time since I'd moved in, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood, the pickup, still running fine. I parked it right in front of the HOA building every day. No gold plaque, no reserved sign, just a truck doing what it was meant to do: haul, carry, and stand its ground. One afternoon, as I was locking up the office, a woman I hadn't met before approached. Mid-60s, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a manila envelope. "I heard what you did," she said. "This was my husband's house. He passed last year. Edith fined me for keeping his rose bushes, said they violated landscaping uniformity. I still have the letter." She handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of every notice she'd received, every check she'd written, every receipt, all in chronological order. I looked up. "We'll make it right." She nodded once, then turned and walked away. We weren't just fixing a neighborhood. We were undoing years of fear, one envelope at a time. By early autumn, the neighborhood had transformed. Gone were the beige plastic violation slips taped to mailboxes. Gone were the whispered complaints and the constant tension. With Edith awaiting trial and her enablers either indicted or disgraced, the community had started breathing again. But the storm wasn't finished, not yet. Linda, our new treasurer, called me one evening with a voice tight with concern. She'd been reviewing a stack of archived bank statements we'd recovered from the HOA's second storage unit. the one we didn't even know existed until a former maintenance worker tipped us off. "There's a set of monthly transfers," she said. "Always dated the second Friday. They go to a separate account not in the main logs. The memo lines are vague: consulting, outreach, property compliance assistance, but the amounts don't match any approved budget. How much are we talking? Just over 120,000. Spread out over 4 years. We met that night in my garage where I'd set up a makeshift desk beside the shelves of tools and lumber. Linda laid out the paperwork in neat rows, each transfer highlighted in yellow. At the end of the table was a single page that stood out: a disbursement to an organization called Haven Reach. I glanced at it. Never heard of them. Neither had I, so I called the IRS. They're not a nonprofit, not even a registered LLC. "So what are they?" She hesitated. "A front." Carmen joined us 20 minutes later, eyes scanning the documents with increasing urgency. "You said Edith's niece was involved in one of the shell companies, right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "L&F Property Services." She nodded once. "Haven Reach is tied to a P.O. box in the same complex. Different name on the registration, but the handwriting matches. I've seen it on 2 other documents." "What does that mean for us?" Linda asked. Carmen looked up. "It means Edith was running a long con. She wasn't just embezzling through fake vendors. She was laundering HOA money through a fabricated nonprofit, and it gets worse if she claimed those payments as charitable donations on any tax returns. That's federal." We brought it to the district attorney the next morning. By the following week, a federal fraud investigator was assigned to the case. Edith's initial charges, already serious, were expanded. The new indictment added tax fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes across state lines. One of the shell companies had received a transfer routed through a bank in Nevada, which triggered federal jurisdiction. Meanwhile, we had more work to do. The community still needed healing, and the legal battles were far from over. Carmen recommended we host a transparency forum, something to reset expectations, open the books, and allow residents to ask questions directly. We held it on the clubhouse lawn. Folding chairs filled up fast, and neighbors brought their own when spots ran out. Dave set up a borrowed PA system, and Linda brought charts showing where our money had gone and where it would go now. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about Edith. I talked about the future. "This place was built on silence," I said. "On people trusting that someone else was watching the books, enforcing the rules, doing the right thing. That silence almost cost us everything. We've got HOA bylaws now that require every expenditure to be published within 48 hours. We've got community votes on all non-emergency spending. And we've got each other. That's how we move forward." Applause followed, not polite clapping, but real, sustained applause. People who'd barely spoken to their neighbors before were shaking hands, making plans. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Special Agent Riley with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He'd been reviewing the forensic audit results Carmen helped compile. "We found something else," he said. There were personal income tax returns filed by Edith that claimed over $60,000 in charitable deductions to Haven Reach. Not only is that fraudulent, but we have evidence she submitted forged donation receipts to support the claim. "Does that help our case?" "It helps everyone's case," he said. "Especially yours. If the community votes to pursue civil damages, this strengthens your position tenfold." We did vote. 91 homeowners signed onto a class action suit seeking restitution for illegally collected fines, fraudulent assessments, and punitive damages. Carmen filed the suit in Superior Court, naming Edith, her niece, her sister, and both shell companies. The court date was set for mid-December. In the meantime, the federal case moved forward. Edith's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested in leniency. Too many people had been hurt. Too much trust had been shattered. The judge denied bail again, citing flight risk and continued danger to the community's financial security. And then, the final blow came from an unexpected source. A man named Marcus Holtz showed up at the HOA office one afternoon. Early 40s, sharp suit, briefcase in hand. He introduced himself as a forensic title examiner working with a real estate compliance firm. He asked to speak with me and Linda privately. "There's a property deed I need to show you," he said. The document he laid on the table showed a transfer of a half-acre parcel adjacent to the neighborhood's greenbelt. It had been designated for community use on the original development plan's walking trails, maybe a small garden space. But 2 years ago, it had been quietly sold. To who? I asked. He flipped the page. To Haven Reach, sold for $1. No permission, no vote, no disclosure, he nodded. Illegal on every level. We filed an injunction immediately. The court froze the deed transfer and the property was returned to the HOA's ownership under a fraud clause. The judge called the sale an egregious abuse of fiduciary duty. By the time Edith was sentenced, the courtroom was packed. Residents filled the benches, many wearing navy blue shirts with the words "We Remember" printed across the chest, a nod to the color of my old pickup, the spark that started everything. She was convicted on all counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, tax fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful transfer of community assets. The judge sentenced her to 17 years in federal prison without parole. Her niece received 6, her sister 4. Outside the courthouse, no one celebrated with balloons or banners. But there was justice in the air, thick and satisfying. People hugged. Others cried. Some just stood with hands in their pockets, watching the building as the last pieces of Edith Baxter's empire crumbled behind its doors. Back in the neighborhood, things settled into something better than peace. They settled into accountability. We used part of the restitution funds to install a community garden on that reclaimed greenbelt parcel. The rest went into a transparency fund, with every dollar tracked and published. We retired the HOA's old name, too. The new board voted unanimously to dissolve the former charter and re-establish under a residence council model. No president, no reserved parking, just neighbors. As for the truck, still runs like a dream. I keep it polished but not perfect. It's a symbol now not of rebellion but resilience. I park it in a different spot every week, sometimes by the clubhouse, sometimes near the garden, sometimes right outside the new community workshop we built in the old HOA office. One afternoon, a teenager from down the block asked why people always smiled when they saw it. I told him the truth. Because once, someone tried to make it disappear, and instead it made everything visible. He nodded like he understood, and I think he did.